So we do a lot of engagement activities, and we have a major project that we've been working on for the last 4+ years that started with a seed grant from Texas State in San Antonio. So we do a lot of engagement with audience, trying to convince them why they need to do the right things in terms of decisions. And decisions, when we talk about decision making, the only thing that comes to mind is a policy making. And I'm talking about more than policy making. I'm talking about convincing the private sector, the industry, technology to do the right thing. But I'm also talking about us, the common citizens, civil society, to do the right thing. So we do a lot of this work and showing the numbers, showing the future of the projections in terms of water, energy, food, resources for the future, and how is our daily decisions make an impact. The last thing I want to talk about, something that I started many years ago, and I would really hope that we spread the word. Our students are not globalized in many ways, and I'm making maybe an overgeneralization, but at least the students I see are not globalized. Traveling to India and sitting at the Ritz doesn't make you having a global experience. So we've developed over the years a concept of global service learning. I teach at A&M, I teach the capstone course, and I provide many of our students with global experiences. So for example, they were in Lebanon last year. They couldn't travel because of the COVID and other security issues, but they were working on a weekly basis with teams across the globe from Purdue University with AUB students, designing a affordable, locally produced solar dryer that will preserve the quality of pomegranate. Pomegranate is many of our communities use this. It's a very healthy, a lot of antioxidant, but it also has a lot of nutritional value. The point is, how do you engage our local students here in the US in a global service learning opportunity? How do we open that door? And I hope that this is something, we haven't had the chance to talk about this, Ali, but I hope that this is something we can do, engaging students from different disciplines with the international community, trying to expand their horizon on what can be done. So I don't want to take too many before going into, so that was the appetizer. Okay, now we're going into the main course. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the point I'm trying to share here, going back to the WAFRA concept, to the synergy, we have a world that our primary resources of water, energy, food is highly interlinked. What that means? It means that if I have a water scarcity, I will have food insecurity, and I will have health issues. So trying to understand this very complex system of interactions and trying, from an engineering term, decouple these interactions, understand this complexity, but also, so here's the challenge I tell my own students and myself every day. Today, if I look at back in the early stages of solar energy, we were looking at the theoretical limit of how can I increase efficiency of the solar cells. It was in the 5-10% efficiency. Now it's in the 14-15. We have not reached that theoretical limit. The challenge I tell all of my students, we are looking at photosynthesis as a reaction, and how much of the water that is in that reaction is converted into carbohydrate? Less than 1%. So my theoretical limit of water use, the relationship is 1-2% of that water is converted into carbohydrate and the food we eat. And how much of that water we use today? Almost 80% of the water goes into food production in terms of my water. So we have a long way to go to look at this integration and decoupling the water and food. And the same thing can be said. In Texas, 35% of my fresh water goes into energy production. So the theoretical limit is 0. I could have energy production with 0 water. And that's so my point here, there's no reason for this highly interlinked system, because if one of these resources break and I have stresses, it's going to impact the whole system. And those are the things we need to keep in mind. Anyway, so yes, we do have a gap, and the data we have proven, we published this. We do have a gap in food. We have a gap in water. By the way, in Texas, the gap in Texas is 40% in the next 30 years. I will have, with the business as usual, I need to come up with 40% additional water. I don't have it. I don't have it. And the more interesting part in Texas is that the competition between the hydraulic fracturing, the growing cities, we have the largest growing cities. Our major cities are the largest growing, fastest growing cities in the US. And of course, the shrinking agriculture. And on top of that, I need to produce more. So there's what we call this is a complex system. A complex system is not a complicated system. So please distinguish between these two. This is not a complicated system. Complicated systems are difficult to come up with a solution, but they have a solution. Complex systems do not have a straightforward solution. And it's very much a highly nonlinear. So you could see why this work is important. And that's why we need to build what we call the nexus, the system of interconnectedness that identifies quantify these interlinkages and try to understand these complexities so we can really reduce that highly interdependent system. So anyway, we're looking at hotspot, we're looking at trade-off. Trade-off is very important in this space because we don't have enough that everybody will have everything they want. No, we have to choose moving down the road. And it's interacting with diet and diseases, with rising economies, climate change, political pressures, technology, and all of those. Now, the beauty about the system that we're trying to build is does not replace any of the current knowledge that we have about disciplinarity. So the outer circle is about interdisciplinarity. So I come from the integrated water resources management. Ali and I affiliate with that. So we're not trying to replace that. We're trying to build on it and look at a much larger system of challenges. So there's a bunch of tools that we're looking at. But I want to start by highlighting the role of soil. Soil is the kind of the unknown resource that we take for granted. And we need to really better understand that role of soil. So soil is at the heart of water and food security. And with the climate change, in fact, we're working on a proposal today, it's also at the heart of climate change. It's also at the heart of carbon sequestration. So how do we manage soil for water, energy, food security? I think this is a challenge that we have to work on all together. So yes, soil is not only providing us with water, energy, and providing us with proper management with carbon sinks, it's also home for biodiversity. It has a rich biodiversity in terms of the home for a lot of the microflora that we need in our daily life. And I need to make that statement because soil is ignored. And I'll tell you a bit more about the way we deal with soil today, the way we teach soil, the way we address soil. We were talking about climate change earlier. All of the climate models use a very simplistic 65 years old model of soil, which is based on texture, which is static. Soil is a living entity that needs to be modeled as a living entity, as a shrinking, swelling that has so the soil is not a bunch of sand, silt, and clay mixed together and makes a soil. Soil is much bigger than that. And I'll talk a little bit about this in a second. So I'll talk about these buckets and I'll focus on a couple of these buckets. So if I look at alternative water space, the first is the green water management. And I'll talk about this a bit more. So again, based on an earlier definition I threw, which is very gross, it's the water that stays in the soil after it rains. And it's not an insignificant portion of our hydrologic cycle. It has been an insignificant because we don't see it. And something we don't see it, we don't account for it, is not there. Second, we'll talk about wastewater reuse. I will not talk much about precision irrigation, but I'll share one example that shows the importance of it. And last is water productivity, which will not be discussed today. But those are the four areas that I think we need to focus on. This is an simulation experiment we conducted in North Africa. And we did the entire North Africa region. The striking part is that there is much more. If you combine the light and the dark green together, that constitute what I'm calling the green water. And compare that with the blue, which is the fresh water. The fresh water is the surface water that you see. It's the groundwater. That's the body of what we call, what the hydrologists would say, this is the amount of water we have to allocate. And look at the combined light and dark green. And that's what is the green water space that I'm talking about. But it's not, you don't see it and you don't manage it. I'll give you another piece of statistics. 2/3 of the food we eat on our table is coming from non-irrigated agriculture. All of the wheat and grain that we eat, all of us, with this global supply chain, is coming from rain-fed agriculture, which is green water. So it's not an insignificant, it's not an economically insignificant portion, nor it's an insignificant portion of our hydrology. But we still, it's invisible to us. In many of us, it's invisible. So that's the first element that I want to mention. The second element, and this slide, I hope it will convince policymakers to focus on that as a resource. The green bar is the trade that I talked about earlier with green water, and the blue is the trade from blue water. Look at, economically speaking, in terms of the big supply chain, the importance of green water space in the economy, in the trade, agriculture trade. And I think this is something that I hope would be an awakening to, for us to really look at the ground, that space. So let me zoom in the more in-depth of that green water space for a second. So grossly, I talked about green water is the water that stays in the soil after a rain. The reality is, we all know, if you don't have a precise definition, and if you don't have a precise accounting, then it means nothing to me, okay? And if you dig into literature, there are 5 different definitions of green water. So as a scientist community, the soil physics community, we haven't really defined it, quantified it to a level where we can start giving an accounting. So this is a simple hydrologic cycle. You've got lakes and rivers. So lakes and rivers and ocean is what I'm talking about, along with the groundwater, is what we talked about, that blue water space. Everything else is the green water space. So water comes in, rain, it goes into infiltration and evapotranspiration. So this is what you see as a overall hydrologic cycle. Let's talk about 3 of those 5 definitions. Rainwater stored in the soil. Okay, what does that mean? Okay. Other definition would say storage and actual transpiration. Transpiration is what that water is lost through evapotranspiration process, through the plant xylem and through the plant system. The third, storage and actual evapotranspiration. My point here is, if we want to manage that resource, we need to know how to account for it, and we need to know how to measure it. And we don't have a consistent way of measuring. So the first challenges for the soil community is to say, this is how we define it, and this is how we're going to account for it. And we'll come back to this in a second. Before I talk about how do we account for it, I want to have a couple minutes of I apologize for the non-soil people here, because there's a lot of soil chemistry, there's a lot of soil physics here, but I'm going to try my best to simplify it. So imagine that you have a rain event, and you've got the soil is saturated. And we all are familiar with Texas soils. Texas soils is a highly expansive soil. So if you look at the upper right, that circle, this is a saturated soil, where the soil is highly saturated in both the micro and the macro pores. And if I'm plotting the specific volume, which is the inverse of bulk density, and the x-axis is the water content, that curve that traces the specific volume as the soil gets dry is what we call the shrinkage curve, okay? And the other curve is the water potential curve. There's an inverse relationship between water potential is the amount of energy you need to exert to soil to extract water, okay? So let's think of a root for a second. And the drier the soil, the more energy that roots need to extract so that it can have its own water need. So what you're looking here is, and these are actual measurements. These are not made up curves. These are actual continuous measurements that we have in our facility. As the soil gets drier and drier, it shrinks. These points that you see are not random points. These are what we call inflection points. Those are very fundamental ways in which we observe the dynamics of the soil and water. And why I'm interested in this? Because I can now tell you exactly where is green water space in this domain and where is the free water space in that domain. So I have now a quantitative evidence of measuring without any definition. I don't care about any definition. I have a measurement protocol that quantifies. So I could go into the field, I could take soil cores, bring them to the lab, do this analysis, and I can tell you exactly where we are in the space of green water space. Now, the definition now becomes a functional definition of where we are in this curve. So I take this further, and if I take these curves and I plot the macro water and the micro water, I'm going to come up with these two graphs, the green and the blue. And if I take the second derivative of this water flow in the soil, that's the shrinkage curve, I come up with two, for those of you who are in this domain, are very familiar with the permanent wilting point and with the field capacity. So the capacity of the soil to hold water is the difference between field capacity, which is after it rains, how much water is retained, all the way down to permanent wilting point, which is the point in which a plant will wilt and will die. That is what I have now, what I call the water capacity in the soil. And it's not a theoretical definition, it's a functional definition that allows me to take this and use it for precision irrigation. I'm not looking at the lookup table in a text that was done 50 years ago. These properties change with management. So I have now the ability to go to the field and have all these sensors, bring them to the lab, and precisely measure these properties. Now, there's a lot of chemistry that will change these properties with time, and we're trying to define that. That's why I said earlier, if we irrigate with brackish water, with wastewater, those properties will change. To what extent they will change? And that's the trade-off I'm talking about. Trade-off between having a new water resource to use, and what's the impact on soil health and soil chemistry, and the abundance of food that I will generate with that. So there's a complex trade-offs that we're setting up here. Switching to a practical example, actually this is done in Tunis, in Gibis. We were looking at the feasibility. We had the concept and we applied it in southern Tunis, in a city called Gibis, where it has one wastewater treatment plant. And we were looking into where are the water sinks. If I have a treated wastewater plant, where does that treated wastewater can be used? It can be used for irrigation, it can be used for industrial reuse, and it can be used for recharge. So we were looking at this as an example, and this is a classical value-added example. That water as a resource, if I use it for agriculture, it's going to impact my soil health. But at the positive side, it will improve my food security. So it's a very complex trade-off analysis that me as a scientist, I cannot do. So we need to have people coming in around the table to start discussing those trade-offs. And is the food, additional food that you bring on the table worth the environmental degradation you have in the soil? So you could imagine, so this is the green dot is where the treatment plant was, and those are concentric circles. Every circle it gives you a jump up in the pumping cost, because the further that farm from where you are generating that treated wastewater, you have to pump more. So it becomes a really nexus of a trade-off. But just to demonstrate the example here, for that specific plant, we were able to have 6.2 million cubic meter of additional water per year that allow us to produce additional crops allocated to 3.6 hectares of irrigated land. That's the trade-off we're talking about. So we were able to measure the soil health, we were able to measure the impact on food, and we were able to look at all of these trade-offs. One remark here that I would say, and this is for the civil engineers in this room. When we talk about wastewater treatment, there is only one design that we have. We treat this water to death. Okay? We strip it from, so if I'm using that treatment plant, I have only one criteria in mind in terms of the quality. We need to evolve our thinking to have end user justifying the quality control for that. Meaning, if I'm using it for irrigation, why do I need to treat the phosphate and need to treat the nitrate? Those are elements that I need for agriculture. So can we evolve our thinking in terms of the treatment technology to be smart technology that takes into account the end user? So if I'm using this for groundwater recharge, I have a different quality criteria than I'm using this for irrigation. And I think we're not there. We're not there, but we need to be there. We need to have the chemists allowing us, with the technology, to have a smart cleanup and modular cleanup technology that will take the end user. So imagine the wastewater treatment of the future would have a smart algorithm that runs the treatment, where you say, okay, this so many cubic meter going for irrigation, then I need to assemble the plant to have that water quality suitable for irrigation as compared to going into municipal use. And we're not there, but we need to be there. We did this in San Marcos, and here's the bias. When we got into this experiment, we were told there's a pioneer farmer who has been irrigating with treated wastewater for the last 10 years. I was just coming back from the experiment in Tunis, where we had negative impact of treated wastewater. So my hypothesis when we were doing this experiment is that we're going to see the same. We're going to have some degradation of soil properties as a result of treated wastewater irrigation. Little I knew that in San Marcos, they had a sophisticated, high-end, high-energy consuming wastewater treatment that treated that water to be better than the brackish groundwater that they use for irrigation. So we had inverse relationship. So the treated wastewater gave us much higher yield than the treated wastewater. Anyway, that just kind of gives you the frame of reference in terms of. The point here is that there is some impact, but it depends on the water quality. In this specific case, the groundwater has a high salinity. It impacts the yield much higher. But the point also is that we need to measure long-term soil quality. And just without going into any detail, the difference between the upper and the lower point on each of these bars is the difference between field capacity and permanent wilting point. And that difference is what we call how much water can be stored in that soil. That's very important to me. Many of us do irrigation. If that difference between upper and the lower point is too large, it means I can irrigate that much, and I can take longer days before I can re-irrigate. If that difference is small, I have to go and irrigate one at a time, one irrigation at a time, or maybe more frequent, and that impacts the water management. This is the trade-off that we were looking at in the experiment that we conducted in Tunis. Yes, there are positive things that happens in with wastewater treatment. That's the supportive policies. We need to enabling supportive policies. In Tunis, there was no supportive policies. In fact, I don't think there are supportive policies anywhere for treated wastewater use. We need a good governance and we need a viable economic model. But on the plus side, it's an economic growth opportunity. It has a restoration and protection of riparian zone. It's a climate risk mitigation, and it adds to the food security. Of course, we need to look at, we did an extensive study looking at farmer perception. Farmers don't want to use it because they perceive, and that there is probably also a cultural dimension to this. Carbon emission, we are looking at that at the moment, and we're looking at environmental health aspects of the water reuse. This is my last slide. And I would like to put together with you, a new vision for the food and agriculture system of the future. If I go to a farmer today, and I asked that farmer, what's your metric of success? He tell me, or she would tell me, I want to have tons per acre, that many tons per acre. What does that mean? It means that the only thing that matters to me as a farmer, as a producer, is how much yield I will have per area. Okay, that's the measure. It's a very simple linear model. It does not account for nutritional value of what I'm producing. It does not account for human and ecosystem health. Okay, and we need to evolve into a model that is a complex model that says, I'm not only interested in yield, I'm interested in protein production. Don't tell me how many bushels you have. Tell me how many calories or how many vitamin and how many nutrient and how many protein units you'll produce. That's the key issue that I'd like to emphasize. That's where we need to be. So don't tell me I'm going to produce that many biomass. I want to produce nutritional value based on my diet. At the same time, I want to account for soil health, human health, and ecosystem health, and environment in terms of emission. Now, we're not there, but that's where what I see the circular food and agriculture system need to evolve to. I will close with one statement that many of my colleagues in agriculture don't like it, but I'm going to say it anyway. We farmers destroyed the world, okay? But we shall restore the world. We farmers will reclaim that world, okay? That's what I would like to close. I think if we can debate that, but I think we have how much we're doing on time? Yeah. We have an obligation to save the world, we farmers. I think we have done so good for our own good in terms of producing, but we have had, I talked about AMR before, antimicrobial resistance. We use it for, you know why in the poultry industry we use antibiotic? I can tell you because we've been working on this for a long time. We use it for growth hormone. We use it for preventive treatment, and we use colistin. Colistin is an antibiotic they use at the ER room as a last resort, and we use it to enhance our production in the animal industry. We have polluted the streams. We have polluted the groundwater, and we have produced with one thing in mind, which is production. And I think we have the opportunity now to reverse that and make farm practices a sink for carbon, a farm practices to be safe for human, for ecosystem, and I think we have that opportunity. So I'd like to close with this model of the, let's call it the regenerative food and agriculture system. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mohtar, for this interesting presentation. And provocative, so I think this is a great opportunity to start a good discussion. So anybody has any comment or question? By the way, I would like to recognize our two other guests Dr. Virender Sharma. He was our guest seminar speaker a couple of weeks ago, and Dr. Samuel Ma. So both of them are from Texas A&M University, and they're visiting with us and would like to interact with us on potential collaboration. Dr. Sharma, this is the microphone for you. You have a question.
Yeah, excellent talk. Thank you for really make my visit here very worth to listen you. So thank you very much for your nice presentation. I think is very interesting study you showed about the crop increase by was cotton yield. Did you also go after the quality of the cotton? Does it matter, or what, or is it just the ongoing study?
Uh,
What happened with the quality of cotton? Is satisfy farmers, or what happened to that?
we didn't, in this particular study, it's a 10-year study at the farmer side. We took permission to use his data. We did not look into quality, but that would be extremely important to do because we know that in a previous study that we did, a lot of the pollutant go through the xylem and the plant system, and we consume them. But in this study that I showed here, we did not look into quality.
And last, may I ask one?
Sure.
I think last about the antimicrobial things is the way I am learning from you. There's really is a big problem.
It's a big problem.
I think WHO is also saying that one of the biggest problem of the century. So, what progress this we have made on this direction, or we are talking, or how that it looks like is very big unknown to me.
Yeah. So we had the last project I did with AUB before I left was a long-term study. We got in fact, it was funded by Weight Watchers. You know Weight Watchers, that big company. We happened, the CEO, founder, is a graduate of AUB. So I approached him, said, we need to have a study on the food safety. So he gave us a generous grant, and we did a large study that looks into this. So we know a lot, but we still don't know much. But what we know today is that AMRs are existing in the entire food supply chain. It's in the irrigation. So farmers would say, oh, I'm not using it. I'm not using hormone. But the reality is those AMRs exist in the water system. You irrigate with them, and that irrigation water goes through the plant system. And because of the physiology of the plant, it's appearing in lettuce. So we had testing in the lettuce leaf, it's there. In the fruits, it's there. So it's not only in the animal system, because like intuitively you would say it's in the chicken meat or in the beef. But the reality, what we found is that it's everywhere. It's in the irrigation water, highly mobile, and it's making its way to fruits and vegetables. So this is the reality where we are. What we are trying to work, in fact, the last workshop I hosted in Lebanon was with the Health and Safety Committee at the Parliament. It needs an effort across the board. In Lebanon, I don't know other countries. I would be interested to see what would it be in our home country here in the U.S. Specifically the colistin is very regulated, extremely regulated with the health. Like if I cannot go as an individual and take a colistin from the pharmacy, they don't sell it to me. It's only administered at the hospital. The interesting thing, and that's the same in Lebanon. The interesting thing, if I'm a farmer, I produce chicken or I produce goat and beef or lamb, I go next door without even anybody asking from a pharmaceutical that sells to farms, and I could get as much as I want. As much as I want, so it's free. So it's not coming from the abuse from the health sector, it's coming from abuse from the agriculture sector, and it's in the system. So what we are working on policy that will prohibit the use of these hormones until it's regulated, strictly regulated, colistin in this specific case should be abandoned globally. I think there are only few countries that are abandoning colistin, but it should be abandoned globally. There is no need for a chicken industry to use colistin. I mean, there are many other alternatives. So there is a science that we need to know in terms of the supply chain. There's a policy action, but there's also awareness that we need to bring. It's a very, very complex problem. AMRs are a huge issue that we're going to be dealing with.
I have another question here.
Thank you, Dr. Mohtar. My name is Sunil Dhobadel. I'm from Department of Agriculture here. I'm very much excited after listening to your presentation. I just want to know your take on rainwater harvesting, because that can have lots of potential in capturing that rainwater that you mentioned. But the thing is that I don't see that many rainwater harvest projects. What do you think the reason is? It the economic reason or technical reason why we don't see that many rainwater harvest projects?
Thank you for the good question. Going back to this slide, the dark green is the soil green water. The light green is irrigated, that's green water irrigated. This is water harvesting. So what I saw example in Tunis, some of the water harvesting structures that we've experienced in Tunis are 2,000 years old. They were built by even before Romans. They're still in use. Why is it not practiced? I mean, it's not practiced maybe in North America, but if you go to North Africa, it's widely practiced. If you go to India, some of the cisterns that you see, globally, it's a very widely used practice, but we don't see it here because maybe of abundance that we have. You go to some of the dry areas in Lebanon, and you have an aerial view. You're going to see every farm has, the only way to irrigate is using water harvesting structures. So it's very widely used globally. We don't see it here. Maybe we will. Maybe we need more awareness. And farmers in North Africa, in Lebanon, in many Mediterranean, they're very poor farmers, but they do small structures that they store that water and they use it for irrigation. Now, a broader definition of water harvesting structures is not only what you see in like fresh water, you pump it. In North Africa, many of the practices, it's the run-on. So you've got every tree has a mini watershed, a collecting area that collects that water and irrigates it. So every drop is used for food production.
Can I add one more? I just want to add one thing to the last statement that you made, that farmers destroyed the crop or environment. I just want to add to that is that I think the part of the solution is also consumer, because we as a consumer just demand the higher yield, right? I mean, we want to eat more. We don't care more about the quality of what we are eating. I mean, you talk about those microbial contamination, but we as a consumer are not aware, so we don't demand those contamination-free foods. So I think the part of the solution should be also the consumers as well.
Thank you. Very important. Very, very important. Yeah, very important.
Now that's a very provocative statement, but I think there's producers to blame, consumers to blame, and government policies which encourage certain types of practices, certain types of products like corn with the price supports and so on. So I think part of the problem, at least from an economic standpoint, is that the prices are all wrong. The prices don't reflect so-called social costs or environmental costs. Yeah. And as a result, we overutilize water, we overutilize the environment, and we overutilize the natural resources. Yeah. So I think that as a result, we have a lot of the problems that we face today. So most consumers think that we're already paying too much for gasoline and so on. But if you look at Europe and some of the other countries, the prices reflect the true cost to society.
Yeah.
So I think that is one of the things that if we don't address, but that gets into the politics of the thing.
Yeah.
Without the political will, we're not going to get carbon prices or other prices right. So it's a very good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. My good colleague, late Tony Allen, who is a legend in virtual water, he started the virtual water concept. I'll quote him in a very controversial statement that he made. Our biggest problem is that food is very cheap. And that comes back to your comment. Politically, we're lumping two issues. Food we have to incorporate all of the externalities in the food cost. That's one thing. But what we combine with that is access. So access to food should not be at the expense of the true cost of producing food. So yes, I'm all for access, and we all work for that access. But let's not burden the food and agriculture system with the access issue. Let's separate these two subjects. Let's have the true value, true cost of the food. So for those of us who can afford it, we should pay that true value. Then we would waste less. If I'm paying $1 for that tomato, I'm not going to throw it. I'm going to eat it, and I'm going to eat it, and I'm going to cut the portion that's starting to rot, and I'm eating the rest. So these two we're lumping in the same basket, and we should separate. Access, those who cannot afford it, let's have an intelligent policy that will make sure access is not prohibited to people, but at the same time, food needs to have all the externalities embedded in that cost.
I think that's a very important point here, because in many issues, when you talk about savings, especially in the area of water, for instance, water pricing comes as one of the options. But if you do that, you hurt the poor, the limited resources people. But I think it's very important to distinguish between access and price, and that's what the policy is. So the people who need support to have access to that resources, we need to support them, but at the same time, people who can afford, as you mentioned, pay the right price. I have a question here from Dr. Kabroum here.
I'm Kubrom, that's why I'm called Kubrom, and we met earlier. Yeah. So I'm very angry by your last words that farmers destroyed the world, because I am one of the agriculturalists, not angry in a joking way. So if you add farmers say destroy the world to save lives, that would make you at good terms with agriculturalists. So my question is about this water in North Africa.
Water
in North Africa.
North Africa.
So I am from Eritrea, and as you may know, and you mentioned it, Ethiopia built a dam in the Nile River, and we have been worried recently that there may be war between Ethiopia and Egypt. In fact, President Trump at one time suggested that Egypt should bomb the Nile dam and things like that. So what do you think about this? Should Ethiopia use the Nile River, Nile dam, the water that is? What do you think of that?
Very, very difficult questions. I don't think I can answer. Very difficult. But I had a project a few years back with a colleague. I'm not sure if you know Ali, if you know Al-Fatih Tahir, looking at quantifying the entire water cycle in the river. I don't think there's a right answer, because the allocation. Okay, I'm going to talk about another concept that I think goes in the nexus that maybe indirectly answer your question. As a hydrologist, we have a model that we've used for many, many years, and that's the allocative model. The allocative model is what we see in not only in the Nile River, in many other river basins. Allocative models say treaties were done 100 years ago, and you have this much, I have this much, and so Sudan and Ethiopia and Egypt each have a certain allocation of the Nile River. The challenge is that allocation did not include the fluctuation in the flow. So we are faced now with a historical allocation that we don't have enough to address. So the question is not about allocative. We need to go beyond the allocation model and look at the synergistic model. And that is not a easy problem to solve. But if I was in the middle of that discussion, I think we need to look at ways in which the benefit of the Nahda Dam need to benefit all the parties somehow. So we're doing exactly this in San Antonio. So the San Antonio case study that we've been conducting, there are losers and there are winners. There's no question about it. The question is, how can the winners share that win with the rest of the society so that everybody would say, you know, this is the right thing to do and let's do it. I think it's a complicated issue, and unfortunately, the region is not left alone for making their own decision. There are pressures from outside. I mean, you all know that Israel is involved in that discussion, and they're miles away. They're trying to intervene and get. So it's a very complicated political dilemma. But I would go back. We need to go away from the allocative model into a new synergistic model that I talked about earlier here.
Okay, another question from here. Dr. Al-Hassan, you have.
Thank you for the very informative presentation.
Thank you.
Regarding the rain-fed green water, you mentioned some cases in North Africa. You mentioned some cases in North Africa. Dealing with the soil is a rain-fed as a vessel, and always we can think the soil that is a renewable resource, but some areas are losing these resources. So it's a degradable resource. It's not renewable by desertification. So if you can comment on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you. The goal is to make it renewable. The goal is to regenerate it by looking into, in fact, the experiments that we have been working on in your farm here is look at those practices. How can you regenerate soil by proper management, by getting some of the organic matter beefed up? I saw a couple questions.
He's part of it, and he's our man in the field helping us for several years on that project.
There are a couple questions on the chat.
Oh, okay.
Maybe let me.
Yeah, I think we should. We forgot. Yeah, go ahead and read them, please. Thank you for our audience who are online. So we will address your questions.
They were just introductions. There was no questions.
Oh, introductions. Oh, okay. All right. Oh, some students. I invited some students to join, so maybe those are students joining via Zoom. So, any other questions that you or comments you might have? So, I think one positive thing about or the importance of soil. You talked about microbial resistance, and soil is the environment that will help us find solution to those microbial resistant problems, because there are more microbes in soil, and we have microbiologists here who can tell us that there are much more microbes in the soil than anywhere else in the globe. So soil will be and is the environment that is going to help us find a solution to this problem of microbial resistance. So another, as a soil scientist, another way to make the case for importance of soil. And I mentioned something that some people, when they refer to soil, they refer to it as dirt. And if you look at it, it's very, really insulting to say to mention that, because that's where our food comes from. That's had not been for soil, we won't have clean water, we won't have food, we won't, and the list goes on and on and on. So I think, I know one of my colleagues, he, in his email signature, he say, please don't call soil dirt. But anyway, any other question, please? If you have any question, comments? If you don't, let's thank our presenter today, Dr. Rabi Mohtar, for his presentation.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you all.
And we have the last word for you. Go ahead.
No, thank you for being here. Thank you. I know that many of you would have been other places, a lot of competing. It's also a trade-off. So I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate all the enriching questions you had. And I would be delighted to expand on our work relationship. I think we have a team from A&M who's also committed to this partnership, and I look forward to further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.